Dr. Marcus Webb had always prided himself on maintaining professional objectivity in his anthropological research, but 3 months into his fieldwork on Kepler 442b, his journal had become a monument to his spectacular failure in that regard. What had started as careful documentation of Thiralian cultural practices had gradually transformed into something that would probably get him drummed out of the Xenoanthropological Society if anyone ever read it. The early entries were appropriately academic, detailed observations about social hierarchies, religious practices, and the complex honor codes that governed warrior society among the mountain settlements. But somewhere around day 47, his notes had started focusing with increasing frequency on one particular research subject. Day 73, Kestra Thane led today's patrol with the same tactical precision I've observed in previous expeditions. Her ability to read terrain and anticipate threats suggests cognitive processing capabilities that exceed even optimistic estimates of Thiralian strategic thinking. Also, she has the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen, like polished amber with flecks of gold that catch the light when she's analyzing potential dangers. Marcus closed the journal with a grimace, acutely aware that he'd just written another entry that had veered from scientific observation into embarrassing personal commentary. This was exactly the kind of emotional compromise that destroyed careers and ruined interspecies diplomatic relationships. The problem was that Kestra Thane was remarkable in ways that made objective analysis nearly impossible. As a scout leader for the mountain clans, she possessed the physical prowess and tactical intelligence that defined Thiralian excellence, but she also displayed intellectual curiosity and cultural awareness that exceeded anything he'd encountered in his previous xenoanthropological studies. "Dr. Webb," came a voice from outside his research tent. "The Council has approved your request to observe tomorrow's training exercises." Marcus recognized the voice as belonging to Jorik, one of the younger Thiralian warriors who served as his official liaison with the community. "Thank you, Jorik. What time should I be ready?" "Before dawn. Kestra's unit will be conducting wilderness survival drills in the volcanic region. She requested that you bring adequate protective gear for extended exposure to sulfur compounds." Marcus felt his pulse quicken at the mention of Kestra's name, then immediately felt embarrassed by his reaction. "I'll be prepared. Please convey my appreciation to Scout Leader Thane for accommodating my research schedule. She said to tell you that human scholars are surprisingly fragile, and she doesn't want to explain to your superiors why you dissolved in acid rain," Jorik replied with what Marcus had learned to recognize as Thiralian humor. "But she also said your questions about tactical decision-making have been insightful." After Jorik departed, Marcus opened his journal again and stared at the latest entry. The professional part of his mind noted that he was documenting unprecedented access to Thiralian military training, which would provide invaluable insights into their cultural values and social organization. The unprofessional part of his mind was focused on the fact that he would be spending an entire day observing Kestra in her natural element. Day 74. Tomorrow's expedition will provide opportunity to observe Thiralian survival techniques in hostile environment. Scout Leader Thane has demonstrated remarkable adaptability to changing conditions during previous missions. Her leadership style combines tactical expertise with intuitive understanding of individual team members' capabilities and limitations. She also has this way of smiling when she's solved a particularly challenging problem that makes my chest tighten in ways that have nothing to do with the thin atmosphere at this altitude. Marcus dropped his stylus and rubbed his temples, wondering when exactly he'd lost the ability to write objective field notes about the most fascinating culture he'd ever studied. The Thiralians were everything anthropologists dreamed of finding, a complex, honor-based society that had maintained its traditional values while adapting to galactic civilization, with social structures that challenged conventional theories about warrior cultures. They were also, in Kestra's specific case, dangerously attractive to human researchers who had spent too much time alone in the field. "This is getting ridiculous," he muttered to himself, reviewing the journal entries from the past 2 weeks. Every single one contained at least one observation about Kestra that had nothing to do with anthropological research and everything to do with his growing fascination with her personality, intelligence, and the way she moved through their mountain settlement with the confident grace of someone who belonged exactly where she was. The worst part was that he suspected she'd noticed his attention. Thyralians were exceptionally observant. It was a survival trait that had served them well during their species' violent early history, and Kestra was more perceptive than most. During their conversations about cultural practices and social traditions, he'd caught her studying his expressions with the same analytical intensity she brought to tactical planning. Whether she interpreted his interest as professional curiosity or something more personal remained unclear, and Marcus was fairly certain he didn't want to find out. Thyralian attitudes toward interspecies relationships were complicated at best, and his status as a visiting researcher made any romantic interest particularly inappropriate. His communication device chimed with an incoming message from Dr. Sarah Chen, his department head back at the university. Marcus, your preliminary reports are excellent, but we need more detailed documentation of daily life and social interactions. The Thyralian contract specifically requests anthropological insights that could improve diplomatic relations. Don't get too caught up in the exciting stuff and forget to document the mundane details that reveal cultural values. Marcus stared at the message, acutely aware that his exciting stuff had become almost entirely focused on one individual rather than the broader cultural patterns that should be the focus of his research. He was supposed to be studying Thyralian society as a whole, not developing elaborate theories about why Kestra's laugh was particularly engaging or how her tactical briefings revealed both intellectual depth and emotional sophistication. Professional objectivity, he reminded himself firmly, opening a new journal entry. You're here to study their culture, not to develop inappropriate feelings for their scout leaders. Day 74, revised Thyralian social structures continue to demonstrate remarkable stability despite integration pressures from galactic civilization. Elder Council maintains traditional authority while adapting to external diplomatic requirements. Individual warriors display loyalty to both ancient honor codes and contemporary practical necessities. He paused, stylus hovering over the page as he tried to think of observations that didn't involve Kestra's remarkable ability to balance respect for tradition with pragmatic innovation, or the way her strategic thinking seemed to bridge the gap between Thyralian warrior instincts and the complex diplomatic realities of interspecies cooperation. This is hopeless, Marcus said to the empty tent, closing his journal and securing it in the locked storage container where he kept his most sensitive research materials. Tomorrow's expedition, objective observations only. No personal commentary, no romantic speculation, no detailed descriptions of how she looks when she's concentrating on difficult problems. As he prepared for sleep, Marcus told himself that he could maintain professional boundaries for one more month until his research period ended and he returned to the university. He could write objective anthropological analysis, maintain appropriate distance from his research subjects, and definitely stop writing journal entries that read like love letters disguised as field notes. Unfortunately, what Marcus didn't know was that tomorrow's expedition would test both his professional objectivity and his personal restraint in ways that would make his current journal entries seem like models of academic detachment. The volcanic region of Kepler 442b was everything the safety briefings had warned Marcus about: sulfurous air that required breathing apparatus, unstable terrain that could shift without warning, and geothermal activity that made the landscape look like someone's vision of hell decorated with interesting mineral formations. It was also where the ancient Thyralians had built some of their most important cultural sites, which meant that modern warrior training included expeditions to places that could kill the unwary in a dozen different ways. Stay within sight of the group, Kestra instructed as their party of 8 made its way across a field of volcanic glass that crunched under their feet like frozen snow. The sulfur levels here can spike without warning, and getting separated means getting dead. Marcus nodded, trying to focus on the cultural significance of training exercises conducted in such a hostile environment rather than on the way Kestra's voice carried absolute authority despite the breathing apparatus that covered half her face. The Thyralians had evolved on a world that demanded constant vigilance and adaptation. These expeditions weren't just military exercises, but cultural rituals that connected modern warriors to their ancestors' survival struggles. Dr. Webb called Jorik from behind him. What do human scholars make of warrior cultures that incorporate environmental challenges into their training protocols? It was a good question that deserved a thoughtful anthropological response about how extreme conditions fostered group cohesion and individual resilience. Instead, Marcus found himself watching Kestra navigate across unstable terrain with the fluid grace of someone who'd learned to read danger in every rock formation and sulfur vent. Environmental integration serves multiple cultural functions, he managed to say while following Kestra's path through a particularly treacherous section. Physical challenges reinforce social bonds while maintaining connection to ancestral survival skills. And what about the fact that we choose to train in places that could kill us? Asked Thyra, one of the senior warriors. Humans seem to prefer safer learning environments. Marcus was about to respond when the ground beneath his feet shifted ominously. What had looked like solid volcanic rock was apparently a thin crust over a much deeper fissure, and his additional weight was causing it to crack in ways that suggested imminent collapse. "Don't move," Kestra commanded, her voice cutting through the sulphurous air with military precision. "Thyra, secure the climbing gear. Jorik, establish anchor points. Dr. Webb, when I tell you to jump, you jump toward my voice without hesitation." Marcus stood perfectly still, acutely aware that he was balanced on geological instability above what appeared to be a rather dramatic drop into unknown depths. Through the cracks spreading beneath his feet, he could see the orange glow of geothermal activity that suggested falling would involve more than just impact trauma. "You know," he said, trying to project calm he didn't feel, "this is definitely going in my research notes as an example of how quickly routine activities can become life-threatening on this world." "Your research notes won't matter if you become a sulfur-cooked human," Kestra replied, positioning herself at the edge of the unstable section with climbing gear secured around her waist. "When this section collapses, you'll have about 2 seconds to clear the danger zone. Any advice for those 2 seconds?" "Trust me," Kestra said simply, extending her hand toward him. "And jump like your life depends on it, because it does." The collapse, when it came, was both sudden and spectacular. One moment Marcus was standing on solid ground, the next he was airborne over a chasm that exhaled sulphurous heat and made him grateful for his breathing apparatus. Kestra's grip on his hand was like a lifeline as she hauled him to safety with strength that reminded him why Thyralians were considered among the galaxy's most formidable warriors. "Are you injured?" she asked, her hands running over his arms and torso with professional efficiency that somehow managed to feel intensely personal. "No, I think I'm fine," Marcus replied, though his voice came out shakier than he'd intended. "Thank you. That was remarkably quick thinking." "Standard rescue protocols," Kestra said, though her amber eyes were studying his face with an intensity that went beyond medical assessment. "Though you handled it well for someone whose species didn't evolve on a world trying to kill them constantly." The rest of the expedition proved less dramatically dangerous but significantly more challenging for Marcus's attempts at professional objectivity. Forced to work closely with Kestra as she guided him through terrain that required constant vigilance and coordination, he found himself observing aspects of her personality that she normally kept hidden from outsiders. Her dry humor emerged during rest breaks when she made pointed comments about human fragility that were clearly meant to be entertaining rather than insulting. Her philosophical depth became apparent during their discussions about why Thyralian culture valued environmental challenges, not just as training, but as reminders that survival required both individual competence and community cooperation. Most dangerously for Marcus's peace of mind, her knowledge of human culture proved to be far more extensive than he'd realized. "Your anthropological theories about honor-based societies," she said as they established camp for the night in a sheltered canyon, "assume that warrior cultures prioritize strength over intelligence. But your own human military history shows that successful warriors have always been thinkers as well as fighters." "You've studied human military history?" Marcus asked, surprised. "I've studied everything I could access about the species we're expected to work with diplomatically," Kestra replied, adjusting the thermal regulators on their shelter with practiced efficiency. "You're Alexander, you're Sun Tzu, you're Joan of Arc, all warriors who succeeded because they understood that physical prowess without strategic thinking is just elaborate suicide." Marcus found himself staring at her in the orange glow of their heating unit, struck by the realization that while he'd been conducting surface-level observations of Thyralian culture, Kestra had been engaging in sophisticated analysis of human civilization. "What else have you studied about humans?" he asked. "Your literature, mostly. Poetry, philosophy, cultural narratives." Kestra's expression became thoughtful. "Humans seem to value emotional complexity in ways that most warrior cultures consider weakness, but your greatest achievements often seem to come from that willingness to embrace contradictory feelings. And what do you think about that approach?" Kestra was quiet for a moment, her amber eyes reflecting the shelter's warming glow. "I think," she said carefully, "that maybe there's wisdom in acknowledging complexity rather than pretending it doesn't exist." That night, as Marcus wrote in his journal while Kestra maintained watch outside their shelter, he found himself documenting not just the day's events but his growing awareness that his feelings for her might not be as one-sided as he'd assumed. Day 75. Today's expedition revealed significant insights into Thyralian cultural values regarding environmental adaptation and risk assessment. More importantly, extended interaction with Scout leader Thane suggests that her intellectual engagement with interspecies cooperation goes far beyond official diplomatic requirements. Her analysis of human cultural patterns demonstrates sophisticated understanding that challenges assumptions about Thyralian attitudes toward emotional complexity. Also, the way she risked her own safety to rescue me from the volcanic fissure suggests either exceptional commitment to protecting visiting researchers, or something more personal that I'm probably not qualified to interpret correctly. Marcus paused, stylus hovering over the page as he tried to decide whether to include his growing suspicion that Kestra's careful questioning about human approaches to emotional expression might indicate her own struggle with feelings that violated Thyralian cultural norms. Before he could decide, Kestra appeared at the shelter entrance, her expression alert with the kind of focused attention that meant she detected something requiring immediate response. "We have company," she said quietly. 3 individuals approaching from the eastern ridge. Moving carefully, probably trying to avoid detection. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, though whether from concern about potential danger or from the way Kestra's tactical awareness made her seem even more attractive was a question he preferred not to examine too closely. "Hostile?" he asked. "Unknown. But whoever they are, they're going to find our camp within the next few minutes." Kestra checked her weapon with fluid efficiency. "Which means we're about to discover whether your research has attracted the wrong kind of attention." The 3 figures who emerged from the volcanic landscape turned out to be members of Kestra's own unit, returning from a scouting mission with news that complicated their expedition in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. "Elder Vorthak has called an emergency council session," reported Thyra, her usually calm demeanor showing signs of tension. "There are questions about the human researchers' activities and their potential impact on cultural security." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggests someone has been reporting your activities to the council in ways that raise concerns about your research objectives," Kestra replied, her voice carefully neutral but her amber eyes reflecting worry. "We need to return to the settlement immediately." The journey back proved to be a tense march through terrain that seemed less dangerous than the political situation waiting for them. Marcus tried to review his interactions with various community members, searching for anything that might have been misinterpreted as exploitation or cultural insensitivity. "Kestra," he said during a brief rest stop, "do you have any idea what specific concerns the council might have?" "Several possibilities," she replied, though her tone suggested she had suspicions she wasn't sharing. "Your research has been more thorough than previous anthropological studies. Some people are wondering whether human academic interest might be preparation for more extensive involvement in Thyralian affairs." "And what do you think?" Kestra studied his face with the same analytical intensity she brought to tactical assessment. "I think you're genuinely interested in understanding our culture rather than exploiting it. But I also think your interests might be more personal than your official research parameters suggest." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, aware that Kestra had just come very close to acknowledging what they'd both been carefully avoiding discussing. "My research has always maintained appropriate professional boundaries." "Has it?" Kestra asked quietly. Before Marcus could formulate a response that wouldn't compromise either of them further, Thyra called for the group to resume their march. The rest of the journey passed in uncomfortable silence, with Marcus acutely aware that his carefully maintained professional facade was apparently less convincing than he'd hoped. They reached the settlement as the sun was setting behind the mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the stone buildings that housed one of the most traditional Thyralian communities on the planet. The emergency council session was already in progress, with Elder Vorthak presiding over a discussion that stopped abruptly when Marcus and Kestra entered the meeting hall. Dar. Webb, Elder Vorthak said formally, his aged voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades mediating disputes and making decisions that affected entire communities. Your presence is requested to address certain concerns that have been raised about your research activities. Of course, Elder, Marcus replied, trying to project calm professionalism while his mind raced through possible explanations for whatever had triggered this emergency session. I'm happy to clarify any questions about my work. The concern, said Counselor Thresh, a younger Thyralian whose political ambitions were well known throughout the settlement, is that your research appears to have developed a focus that exceeds standard anthropological parameters. In what way? Your questions have become increasingly personal rather than cultural. Your interactions with community members suggest interest in individual relationships rather than social patterns. Thresh's voice carried the kind of accusatory tone that made Marcus realize this wasn't a friendly inquiry. Some members of our community believe you may be using academic credentials to pursue objectives that could compromise our cultural security. Marcus felt his mouth go dry as he realized that his growing feelings for Kestra had apparently become visible enough to trigger official concern. Counselor, I can assure you that my research has maintained appropriate professional standards. Can you? Interrupted Thresh. Because we have reports that your documentation includes observations that seem more suited to personal journals than academic research. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow as he understood that somehow, someone had gained access to information about his journal entries. His carefully hidden thoughts about Kestra, his unprofessional observations about her personality and appearance, his growing emotional investment in someone he was supposed to be studying objectively, it was all going to be exposed in the most humiliating way possible. I'm not sure what reports you're referring to, he said carefully, though his voice probably betrayed his growing panic. Perhaps, said Elder Vorthak with the kind of diplomatic phrasing that preceded uncomfortable revelations, you would like to review your research materials to ensure they align with the cultural exchange agreements we signed with your academic institution. That's when Marcus realized with growing horror that his journal had somehow been compromised, and that his most embarrassing thoughts about Kestra were about to become public knowledge in front of the very people whose respect and cooperation were essential to his professional future. Elder Vorthak, he began, trying to think of some way to explain or minimize the damage, if there are specific concerns about my documentation practices. Dr. Webb, came Kestra's voice from behind him, cutting through his attempted explanation. I believe I may be able to clarify the situation. Marcus turned to look at her, noting that her expression carried the kind of determined resignation that suggested she was about to make a decision that would have significant consequences for both of them. Scout Leader Thane, Elder Vorthak acknowledged. If you have relevant information, the Council would welcome your input. Yesterday, while reviewing expedition logistics in Dr. Webb's research tent, I accidentally observed portions of his personal documentation, Kestra said, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was revealing. The materials in question appear to be personal observations rather than official research notes. Marcus stared at her, realizing that Kestra had discovered his journal and was now, for reasons he couldn't understand, providing testimony that might either protect him or completely destroy his remaining credibility. And what was the nature of these personal observations? Counselor Thresh asked with the eagerness of someone who smelled political opportunity. Kestra's amber eyes met Marcus's briefly before she answered, and in that moment he saw something that looked like apology mixed with determination. The observations, she said carefully, suggest that Dr. Webb's interest in our culture has developed a personal dimension that may have compromised his objectivity as a researcher. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear the mountain wind whistling through the gaps in the stone walls. Every member of the council was staring at him with expressions that ranged from disappointment to suspicion to what might have been sympathy. I see, Elder Vorthak said finally. Dr. Webb, do you have anything you wish to say regarding these revelations? Marcus looked around the room at the faces of people who had welcomed him into their community, trusted him with their cultural secrets, and allowed him unprecedented access to their traditions and customs. He thought about his career, his reputation, and the diplomatic relationships that his research was supposed to strengthen. Then he looked at Kestra, standing straight and proud despite having just revealed information that could damage both their reputations, and realized that lying was no longer an option. Elder Vorthak, he said quietly, I'm afraid Scout Leader Thane's assessment is accurate. My research has been compromised by personal feelings that I failed to manage appropriately. And the nature of these personal feelings? Marcus took a deep breath, aware that his next words would determine not just his own future, but the future of human-Thyralian relations and Kestra's standing within her own community. I have developed romantic feelings for Scout Leader Thane that have affected my ability to maintain professional objectivity, he said simply. My research documentation reflects this compromise, and I take full responsibility for failing to maintain appropriate boundaries. The confession hung in the air like a challenge, and Marcus waited to discover whether honesty would prove to be the end of everything he'd worked for, or the beginning of something he'd never dared to hope for. The silence in the council chamber stretched long enough for Marcus to catalogue every expression of shock, disappointment, and calculation on the faces of the assembled elders. Counselor Thresh looked triumphant, as if Marcus's confession had confirmed his suspicions about human ulterior motives. Elder Vorthak appeared thoughtful rather than angry, which Marcus hoped was a positive sign. The other council members seemed to be processing the implications of an interspecies romantic attachment that violated both professional ethics and cultural expectations. Scout Leader Thane, Elder Vorthak said finally, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone navigating politically dangerous territory. Do you have anything to add to Dr. Webb's statement? Kestra stepped forward with the confident bearing that had made her an effective military leader, though Marcus could see tension in the set of her shoulders that suggested she was preparing for battle. Elder Vorthak, counselors, she began formally, I believe there are aspects of this situation that require clarification. Proceed. Dr. Webb's confession is accurate regarding his feelings, but incomplete regarding the circumstances. Kestra's amber eyes swept across the assembled council members with tactical precision. The romantic attachment he describes is not one-sided. Marcus felt his heart stop as he realized what Kestra was about to reveal. She was going to risk her own reputation and standing within the community to ensure that he didn't face the consequences of their mutual attraction alone. You're saying, Counselor Thresh interjected with obvious surprise, that you share the human's inappropriate feelings? I'm saying that over the past 3 months, I have developed respect, admiration, and personal affection for Dr. Webb that exceeds what would be appropriate for a professional relationship, Kestra replied with the same directness she brought to tactical briefings. His research may have been compromised by personal feelings, but those feelings were encouraged by my own behavior and responses. Elder Vorthak leaned forward in his seat, his expression growing more interested than disapproving. Scout Leader, are you claiming responsibility for this breach of cultural protocol? I'm claiming shared responsibility for a situation that neither of us handled with adequate wisdom or restraint, Kestra corrected. But I'm also prepared to argue that the situation presents opportunities as well as problems. Explain. Kestra glanced at Marcus briefly, and he saw something in her expression that looked like determination mixed with hope. Dr. Webb's research, despite its personal complications, has provided insights into human Thyralian cultural compatibility that exceed anything achieved by previous academic studies. His understanding of our values and traditions has been enhanced rather than compromised by his emotional investment in our community. You're suggesting, said Counselor Merrick, one of the more progressive members of the council, that personal attachment might improve rather than hinder interspecies understanding? I'm suggesting that Dr. Webb's willingness to risk his professional reputation by developing genuine feelings for one of our people demonstrates a level of cultural commitment that purely academic research cannot achieve, Kestra replied. His journal entries, while inappropriate for official documentation, reveal understanding and appreciation for Thyralian values that goes far beyond surface observation. Marcus stared at her, amazed by her ability to transform his professional failure into evidence of successful cultural integration. But he could also see the political calculation behind her argument. She was offering the council a way to view their relationship as beneficial rather than problematic. "And what do you propose as a resolution to this situation?" Elder Vorthak asked. "Dr. Webb's current research assignment ends in 4 weeks, Kestra said. I propose that he complete his academic obligations with full disclosure of the personal factors that have influenced his observations. Following that, I volunteer to accompany him as a cultural liaison for future human Thyralian cooperative ventures." The proposal hit the council chamber like a seismic event. Marcus felt his breath catch as he realized Kestra was suggesting they leave her homeworld together, transforming their forbidden relationship into an official diplomatic partnership. "You would abandon your position here to serve as liaison with human institutions?" Counselor Thresh asked with obvious skepticism. "I would extend my service to our people by facilitating better understanding between our species," Kestra corrected. "Dr. Webb has demonstrated that humans are capable of genuine appreciation for Thyralian culture when they invest emotionally as well as intellectually in understanding us. That suggests possibilities for cooperation that purely formal diplomatic relationships cannot achieve." Elder Vorthak was quiet for several minutes, his aged face reflecting the kind of deep consideration that preceded important decisions. "Dr. Webb, what is your assessment of Scout Leader Thane's proposal?" Marcus looked at this remarkable woman who was offering to sacrifice her place in her own community to create a future where their relationship could exist without violating cultural expectations or professional ethics. "Elder, I believe Kestra's proposal offers the best possible outcome for all parties involved," he said carefully. "My research has been compromised by personal feelings, but those feelings have also given me insights into Thyralian culture that I could never have achieved through purely academic observation. If the council approves, I would be honored to work with Scout Leader Thane to establish formal cultural exchange programs that benefit both our species." "And your academic institution would approve such an arrangement?" "And your academic institution would approve such an arrangement?" "Given the quality of cultural insights that emotional investment has provided, I believe they would enthusiastically support a partnership that transforms personal connection into professional collaboration," Marcus replied. "Kestra's knowledge of human culture combined with my understanding of Thyralian society could create diplomatic opportunities that neither species has been able to achieve through conventional channels." Counselor Thresh shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "This proposal assumes that romantic attachment between species can be transformed into productive professional partnership. That's a significant assumption." "With respect, Counselor," Kestra interjected, "the assumption that emotional distance produces better understanding has already been proven false. Dr. Webb's most valuable insights have come from his willingness to engage with our culture on a personal level rather than maintaining purely academic detachment." Elder Vorthak stood slowly, his movements carrying the weight of authority accumulated over decades of leadership. "The council will deliberate on this proposal. Dr. Webb, you will complete your remaining research with full documentation of the personal factors that have influenced your work. Scout Leader Thane, you will prepare a detailed proposal for your role as cultural liaison, including specific objectives and measurable outcomes." "Yes, Elder," they replied in unison. "However," Vorthak continued, his expression growing stern, "I want both of you to understand that this arrangement, if approved, will be scrutinized by authorities from both our species. Your relationship will need to demonstrate clear benefit to human Thyralian cooperation, or it will be terminated." As the council session concluded and the members filed out to begin their deliberations, Marcus found himself alone with Kestra in the gradually emptying chamber. "Why did you do that?" he asked quietly. "You could have let me take full responsibility and protected your own position here." "Because the responsibility was shared, and because hiding from the truth wasn't going to solve anything," Kestra replied, her amber eyes reflecting the chamber's flickering torchlight. "Also because I've been keeping my own journal, and my entries about you would be just as compromising as yours about me." Marcus felt his heart skip several beats. You've been writing about me? About how your questions reveal genuine curiosity rather than academic exploitation. About how your respect for our tradition seems to come from authentic appreciation rather than professional obligation. Kestra's voice grew softer. About how your smile when you think you understand something new about our culture makes me want to show you everything we've ever achieved as a people. Kestra. I know this complicates everything, she continued. But I also know that what we've discovered together, about each other, about our species' potential for cooperation, is too valuable to sacrifice for the sake of conventional boundaries. 3 weeks later, as Marcus prepared to leave Kepler for 42B with Kestra at his side carrying official credentials as a cultural liaison, he reviewed the final entries in his journal, the one that had nearly destroyed his career and ultimately transformed it into something he'd never imagined possible. Final entry: personal feelings for research subject proved to be professionally disastrous and personally transformative. Official recommendation: emotional investment in cultural subjects creates bias that compromises academic objectivity. Unofficial observation: same emotional investment provides insights into interspecies compatibility that purely clinical research cannot achieve. Kestra Thane has agreed to serve as cultural liaison for human-Thyralian cooperative ventures, transforming inappropriate personal relationship into sanctioned professional partnership. We're going to spend the next several years discovering whether love disguised as anthropology can become diplomacy that actually works. He closed the journal and packed it carefully among his research materials, knowing that it would become part of the official record of the first successful human-Thyralian cultural integration program. Ready? Kestra asked from the entrance to his tent, her traveling gear indicating she was prepared for whatever challenges waited for them among the stars. Are you sure about this? Marcus asked, still amazed that she was willing to leave her world for him. You're giving up everything you've built here. I'm not giving it up, Kestra corrected with the confidence that had made her an effective leader. I'm extending it. Our people need advocates who understand both cultures, and our relationship has taught us things about interspecies cooperation that no amount of formal diplomacy could achieve. As their transport lifted off from the mountain settlement that had become the birthplace of their impossible partnership, Marcus reflected that his journal had indeed gotten him into serious trouble. But it had also gotten him something he'd never dared to hope for, a future where his professional expertise and personal happiness had become the same thing. So, Kestra said as they watched her homeworld shrink beneath them, what are you going to write about in your next journal? Marcus smiled, already thinking about documentation that would chronicle their adventures as cultural ambassadors rather than hiding his feelings behind academic pretense. The truth, he replied simply. About us, about what we're building together, and about how sometimes the most dangerous discoveries lead to the most extraordinary possibilities. Kestra's laugh filled the transport cabin with warmth, and Marcus realized that his most embarrassing professional failure had become the foundation for both his greatest success and his deepest happiness. Sometimes, he reflected, getting into serious trouble was exactly what you needed to discover who you were meant to become.